If behavior happens once, often, for a long time, after a delay, or too close together, your measurement choice changes. Let's sort it out. For C3 and C4, think of behavior as something that happens across time. The text explains that behavior has three-dimensional qualities: repeatability, temporal extent, and temporal locus. Repeatability means behavior can occur more than once, so it gives us measures like count and rate. Temporal extent means behavior takes up time, so it gives us duration. Temporal locus means behavior occurs at a certain point in time compared to other events, so it gives us latency and interresponse time, or IRT. E3 focuses on measuring occurrence like count, frequency, rate, and percentage. E4 focuses on temporal dimension like duration, latency, and interresponse time. On the exam, listen for what the question is asking you to capture: how many times, how often per time, what proportion, how long, how delayed, or how much time between responses. Count is a simple tally of the number of occurrences of a behavior. If a learner raises their hand 7 times, the count is 7. Event recording includes procedures for detecting and recording the number of times a behavior of interest is observed. In plain language, event recording is your tally system. Cooper notes that frequency has been used in the behavior analytic literature to mean both count and rate, which can create confusion. The authors report that Carr and colleagues encourage behavior analysts to use frequency as a synonym for count. So for exam language, if you see frequency used by itself, read carefully. Ask whether the question means a raw number of responses or responses per unit time. Count itself is useful when the behavior is discrete and countable. A discrete behavior has a clear beginning and end that makes each occurrence easier to record. Cooper gives us an example of a teacher tallying each time a student leaves their seat. When out of seat behavior is discrete and not so high rate that counting would be difficult. But count alone can miss important information when the duration of behavior matters. In the out of seat example, one occurrence in 30 minutes may look minor if the student quickly returns, but one occurrence could look very different if the student leaves at minute 1 and stays out of seat for the rest of the period. So count tells you how many times behavior happened, not how long each episode lasted. On the exam, if the behavior is discrete and countable, count may fit. If time engaged matters, consider duration. Rate is the number of responses per unit time. A rate measure combines count with the observation period in which the count was obtained. This makes data more meaningful than count alone because the time context is built into the measure. For example, the text describes talk outs reported as responses per minute when class activities had different durations. Rate can be reported as count per 30 seconds, per minute, per hour, per day, or other standard time units. Rate measures can be compared when the unit of time is standard within or across experiments. In ABA terminology, rate is especially important when you need to know how often the behavior happens relative to time. On the exam, if the answer choice is per minute, per hour, or per session time, think rate. When using rate, the counting time must be included. Comparing rate measures without the counting time can lead to faulty interpretations. If counting time changes from session to session, the counting time for each session should accompany each rate measure. When assessing skill development and fluency, Cooper emphasizes measuring correct and incorrect response rates. Rate is described as the most sensitive measure of behavior repeatability. Rate is also described as a preferred measure for free operands, which are behaviors that can occur repeatedly over time. But rate is a poor measure for behaviors that occur within discrete trials or for behaviors that occur for extended durations. So do not automatically use rate just because you can count something. Percentage is a ratio or proportion formed by combining the same dimensional quantities. Percentage expresses the proportional quantity of an event in terms of the number of times the event occurred per 100 opportunities that the event could have occurred. A simple example from the text is accuracy percentage. If a student answers 39 of 50 exam items correctly, divide 39 by 50 and then multiply by 100, you get 78. Applied behavior analysts frequently use percentage to report response accuracy. Percentage can also report the proportion of observation intervals in which target behavior occurred. The table summary defines percentage as parts per 100 and commonly as a ratio of responses of a certain type out of total responses, opportunities, or intervals in which the response could have occurred. On the exam, percentage usually means part over whole times 100. Percentage is useful, but it has limitations. Percentages based on divisors smaller than 20 are unduly influenced by small changes in behavior. For research, Cooper recommends a minimum of 30 observation intervals or response opportunities for percentage measures. The divisor should always be reported when percentage measures are used. Percentage cannot be used to assess proficiency or fluency. Percentage also imposes upper and lower limits on performance because it cannot exceed 100% or fall below 0%. Cooper warns that a change in percentage may erroneously suggest improved performance. So for exam questions, percentage is not automatically wrong, but always check the denominator. The number of opportunities and whether rate or count would be more informative. Duration is the basic measure of temporal extent. Duration is important when the amount of time a person engages in a target behavior matters. Cooper describes duration as useful when behavior occurs for too long or too short a time period. Duration is also appropriate for behaviors that occur at very high rates or for task-oriented continuous behaviors that occur for extended time, such as cooperative play, on-task behavior, or off-task behavior. Researchers and practitioners commonly measure total duration per session or duration per occurrence. Total duration is the cumulative time a person engages in the target behavior. Duration per occurrence measures how long each instance of the target behavior lasts. On the exam, when the concern is how long, think duration. Latency is the elapsed time between the onset of a stimulus and a subsequent response. Response latency is appropriate when the analyst is interested in how much time occurs between the opportunity to emit a behavior and when the person initiates the target behavior. In plain language, latency measures the wait time before the response starts. Cooper notes that interest can focus on latencies that are too long or too short. A long latency might matter when a student takes too long to start an academic task. A short latency might matter when a student answers before the teacher finishes the question or when an adolescent retaliates immediately after peer provocation. Latency data are typically reported as the mean, median, and range of individual latency measures per observation period. On the exam, if the question asks how long after an instruction, cue, or opportunity the behavior begins, choose latency. Interresponse time, or IRT, is the amount of time that elapses between two consecutive instances of a behavior. IRT is a measure of temporal locus because it identifies when a response occurs with respect to the previous response. Although IRT directly measures temporal locus, it is functionally related to rate of response. Shorter IRTs coexist with higher rates of response, and longer IRTs occur with lower response rates. IRT is measured when the time between instances of a response class matters. IRT provides a basic measure for implementing and evaluating interventions using differential reinforcement of low and high rates. Here's the final sorting rule. Count tells us how many, rate tells us how many per unit time, percentage tells us the proportion out of opportunities, duration tells us how long behavior lasts, latency tells us how long until behavior starts after a stimulus, and IRT tells how much time passes between responses. Let's recap. For C3, occurrence measures include count, frequency as count, rate, and percentage, with rate adding time and percentage expressing a proportion out of opportunities. For C4, temporal measures include duration for how long behavior lasts, latency for how long until the behavior starts after a stimulus, and IRT for time between consecutive responses.